Paul had always prided himself on being observant, but today he wished he had acted sooner. Driving down a familiar stretch of road earlier in the day, he had noticed something glinting in the bushes on the side of the road. His mind was focused on the looming work deadline and the traffic was heavy, so he dismissed the flash of light as just another piece of debris. But something about it nagged at him as he sped on, rushing to his appointment. Later that afternoon, after his meeting had ended, Paul found himself driving the same road again. This time, the traffic had eased, and he had more time to think. The memory of the shiny object resurfaced in his mind, and his curiosity stirred. He had time now, so he slowed the car as he approached the spot. As he passed it, something about the object's shape caught his eye. It wasn't just a random piece of debris. It looked like a cage. Paul's heart began to race. Could someone have abandoned an animal here? He felt a knot form in his stomach as he quickly turned the car around and drove back to investigate. Pulling over on the side of the road, he stepped out of the car and cautiously approached the object. It wasn't just any cage. It was small, rusted, and looked barely fit to hold anything. But inside, curled up and trembling, was a tiny, malnourished dog. The poor creature was shaking, its fur matted and its eyes wide with fear. Paul's hands began to tremble as he crouched down. He couldn't believe someone could do this. How long had the dog been here, abandoned in this state? The thought made him sick. Paul let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and gently reached toward the cage. The dog whimpered but didn't move. It was too weak to resist. Paul's heart broke as he realized how close he had come to driving by again and doing nothing. He wished more than anything that he had stopped the first time he noticed the cage, but he knew he couldn't dwell on that now. Time was of the essence. He rushed to his car, grabbed his phone, and called for help. As he waited for animal rescue to arrive, Paul knelt beside the cage, offering quiet words of comfort to the frightened dog inside. It was a painful reminder of what some people were capable of, but Paul also knew that in this moment, he had the power to change the ending of this tragic scene. When the rescue team finally arrived and took the dog into their care, Paul felt a deep sense of relief. He had been shocked and horrified by what he'd seen, but more than that, he was grateful he had chosen to turn back. For the dog, this small act of curiosity had been the difference between life and death. Paul made a sudden decision to turn his car around and head back. Something about that strange glimmer he had seen earlier wouldn't leave his mind. He chuckled to himself, feeling a bit silly. Grown adults didn't turn around on busy roads because they spotted something shiny in the bushes. It was probably nothing, a piece of metal or trash. After all, this was a major road, not exactly a place where people would leave anything of value behind. Yet, as he pulled over and stepped out of his car, Paul's sense of unease grew. What he had seen wasn't a simple lost item, but something far more disturbing. Approaching the spot, he could now make out the shape of a cage, rusted and abandoned by the roadside. He frowned, wondering who could have left something like this here. The thought quickly turned to dread as he got closer. He was no longer amused by his curiosity, but filled with a sinking feeling in his gut. It became clear that this was no accident. Whoever had left the cage here had done so deliberately, and whatever it contained was unlikely to be anything good. Paul's heart began to race as he reached the cage. As soon as he looked inside, he gasped, stepping back in shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Crammed into the small, filthy cage was a litter of puppies, huddled together in a mass of fur. They were packed so tightly it was hard to tell where one began and another ended. The smell of neglect hit him hard, and his stomach churned. He couldn't fathom how anyone could do this, how someone could abandon such helpless creatures on the side of a road like they were garbage. Paul's mind raced as guilt washed over him. He had driven past earlier, focused on his day, not knowing that just feet away, these puppies had been left to suffer. The thought sent chills down his spine. He felt ashamed that it had taken him hours to come back. What might have happened if he had ignored that small voice of curiosity? The puppies could have perished, left in that cage without food, water, or care. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, calling for help. Every second felt like an eternity. He crouched down next to the cage, trying to soothe the whimpering puppies with his voice, though he knew they were too weak and terrified to respond. It broke his heart to see how scared they were, their tiny bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. When animal rescue finally arrived, Paul felt a wave of relief, though his heart still ached. The puppies were taken into care, but Paul couldn't shake the image from his mind, the horror of what he had found. His decision to turn back had saved their lives, but the memory of what he saw would stay with him forever. Paul stared at the cage, his eyes falling on the zip tie that held the door shut. His heart sank at the sight, knowing someone had deliberately left these puppies trapped. He rushed to his car, grabbing both his phone and his emergency toolbox. With shaky hands, he pulled out a pair of pliers and snipped the zip tie, freeing the latch. The cage was large, but it was packed with puppies, all of them huddled together in a chaotic, frightened mess. Paul's heart ached to take them all out and get them to safety, but he quickly realized that it wouldn't be easy. There were too many of them to manage on his own. If he tried to move them into his car, they might scatter or get hurt. As much as it pained him, he knew the safest option for the moment was to leave them in the cage. He crouched down beside the cage, gently extending his hand to scratch the heads of the puppies closest to him. But their fear took over, and they began to jump and scramble, climbing over one another in their panic. Paul could see the confusion and terror in their little eyes, their bodies pressing together in an effort to find some sense of comfort and safety. It broke his heart to see them like this, so small and scared, desperate for protection. Among the mass of fur and tiny paws, one puppy stood out. A small black pup, his eyes wide but curious, tentatively approached the side of the cage. Unlike the others, this one didn't seem afraid of Paul. He placed his front paws on the edge of the cage and looked up at him, as if seeking some kind of reassurance. Unable to resist, Paul carefully reached in and lifted the puppy out, cradling the soft, trembling creature in his arms. The puppy settled against Paul's chest almost instantly, its tiny body relaxing as if it finally felt safe. Paul held the little dog close, his heart swelling with both love and sorrow. He gently stroked the pup's fur, and within moments, the puppy was fast asleep. Its soft breathing a stark contrast to the turmoil inside the cage. As much as this one puppy found comfort in his arms, Paul couldn't forget the others. They were all so young, so vulnerable. They needed to be saved, every single one of them. His chest tightened with the weight of responsibility. He couldn't leave them here, but he couldn't rescue them on his own either. He needed help. Gently placing the black pup back in the cage, Paul pulled out his phone and called animal rescue. As he waited for them to arrive, he knelt beside the cage, whispering soothing words to the puppies. He had found them just in time, but their rescue was far from over. All he could do now was hope that help would arrive soon, and that these helpless animals would finally find the care they deserved. Paul immediately called the RSPCA, his heart racing as he explained the situation. They assured him a team would be sent out as quickly as possible. Still, as he hung up the phone, Paul found himself staring at the puppies in disbelief. He knew there were people capable of mistreating animals, but abandoning a whole litter of puppies like this was beyond his comprehension. These weren't just any puppies, they were adorable, the kind that would melt anyone's heart. Surely, finding homes for them wouldn't have been difficult. So why had someone chosen to leave them here, helpless and exposed? His concern deepened as he noticed some of the puppies swaying on their feet, weak from the heat. The crate was sitting directly in the sun, and the scorching rays were taking a toll on the poor creatures. Paul acted quickly, dragging the heavy crate into the shade of a nearby tree. The puppies were panting, clearly overheated. Desperate to help, he ran back to his car, grabbed a bottle of water, and poured it into his cupped hands. He gently offered the water to the puppies, hoping to provide some relief. A few of the puppies eagerly lapped at the water, but others didn't even stir. Paul's worry deepened with each moment that passed. Some of the puppies were too weak, too exhausted to even raise their heads. His heart broke as he tried to coax them to drink. Every passing vehicle made his pulse quicken, hoping it was the rescue team. Time seemed to drag on endlessly, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours, the rescue team arrived. The sun was already starting its descent, and Paul realized that the puppies had been out here since at least the morning. It was a miracle they had survived this long. The RSPCA team quickly sprang into action, unloading smaller crates and preparing to transport the puppies. They began gently pulling the pups from the larger crate, inspecting each one for signs of dehydration and heat exhaustion. Paul watched in amazement as the puppies just kept coming. One by one, the rescuers lifted the puppies out, their fragile bodies trembling with fear. The puppies huddled together, trying to find comfort in the only way they knew, clinging to one another. They were terrified, but the rescuers held them close, soothing them with soft words and gentle hands as they transferred them to the safety of the smaller crates. By the time all the puppies were out, the count was staggering. 20 puppies in total minus 14 males and 6 females. Paul couldn't believe how many there were, all crammed into that one cage. The thought of them being left out here to fend for themselves was horrifying. But now, at least, they were safe. As the rescue team loaded the last of the puppies into their van, Paul felt a deep sense of relief. The puppies had been saved, but the memory of their fear and suffering would stay with him for a long time. He knew that their journey to recovery had just begun, but at least they were on the path to a better life. Paul stood by as the rescue team finished loading up the puppies, his mind buzzing with questions. As the van pulled away, he felt a mix of sadness and relief. It was hard to see them go, especially after bonding with the small black pup, but he was grateful that they were on their way to safety. The thought of those 20 puppies left alone on the side of the road, growing weaker and sicker, sent chills down his spine. It was a heartbreaking scenario, one that he was glad had been avoided, thanks to his nagging curiosity. Still, Paul couldn't shake the unease in his gut. Why had the puppies been abandoned? What did their previous owners know that he didn't? Had they been left there because of an illness, or was there some other reason? As the rescue van disappeared from view, Paul knew the answers would come soon enough. The puppies were rushed to the vet, and Paul was certain they would receive the care they desperately needed. But the mystery surrounding their abandonment lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. He had never imagined that one simple decision to turn his car around could lead to something so significant. Now, all he could do was wait and hope that the puppies would survive, and that whatever shocking truth was waiting to be uncovered would lead to justice for these innocent animals. Things didn't go as smoothly as Paul had hoped. When the puppies arrived at the veterinary clinic, they were immediately given fluids for severe dehydration, raising concerns about their condition. The rescue team feared the puppies might be sicker than expected, possibly abandoned due to a deadly illness like parvovirus, a highly contagious virus often fatal in young puppies. As the days passed, however, most of the puppies grew stronger, and to everyone's relief, there were no signs of parvovirus. Miraculously, none of the puppies in the crowded crate became seriously ill, except for one, the smallest female, who struggled to survive. The vet discovered she had severe internal problems, including missing ribs and malformed lungs, making it impossible for her to live a healthy life. Sadly, despite their efforts, the team had to euthanize her to end her suffering. When Paul visited the vet to check on the puppies, the little dark one he had bonded with ran straight to him. The head of the rescue team suggested Paul foster 2 puppies, which he gladly agreed to, taking home Hank, Caleb, and Luna to help them recover. The RSPCA launched an investigation into the puppies' abandonment, and a truck driver's dashcam footage revealed a van at the site where the puppies were found. The license plate led to a family who had fostered the puppies, but their van had been stolen with the animals inside. The family was relieved the puppies were safe, though heartbroken over the loss of one. The remaining puppies, including Paul's, were placed in loving homes. Grateful he had stopped that day, Paul formed a strong bond with Hank, while the other puppies thrived in their new families.